I love that.
Okay, everybody, if everyone wants to take a seat, we'll go ahead and get started here. I want to thank everyone for coming in person. For those that may be attending virtually through Zoom. So first, I just, again, want to thank everyone for being a part of this journey. Sort of hopped along towards the end of it, but a lot of key figures. I want to thank Susan Hockenberry, who was the former executive director of Quaker Valley Council of Governments. She was really the kickstarter of this whole endeavor. So wanted to thank her for that. She was working in partnership with Michael Baker International and the Remaking Cities Institute, who are going to be presenting this very thorough presentation tonight that sort of breaks down the findings and analysis from the Route 65 corridor study. Also want to thank the Beaver County COG that was also involved with this study. So with that being said, I want to introduce Kirsten from Michael Baker International Company, who is going to take away this presentation and introduce the concepts and findings.
Need a pause.
Yes.
But thank you all for being here today. Thank you for all coming out here on this icy night, and for those who are online. We wanted to talk through the results, present an overview of this report, big design guide for the Route 65 study. And here tonight, we're going to talk through the report. We're going to show you where to find it online. And we want to really hear from all of you, what you think of some of these ideas, and have some discussion about how we can all move these together, move these forward together. So I'm here with Michael Baker International, and we also have team members who have been working on this from the Remaking Cities Institute at CMU. And of course, Susan, who was working with the QV COG, as Patrick said, this was always spearheaded and led by the QV COG. So this whole process started before I even came on board, back when the QV COG identified the boulevard along Route 65 as this great connecting asset between all the municipalities. I know many of you have been involved in this process since the beginning, so this is not new to you. You know how important that is. You know, you've been part of these conversations to figure out how to maximize that asset, maximize the economic and the community impact value of working together along this corridor.
If everyone on Zoom could mute their microphones, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
We're not seeing the slides advance on the Zoom.
Can't even see the mouse here.
And hopefully for those who are on Zoom, they're able to use the chat or let us know, or just speak up and let us know if they're not hearing anything or anything needs to be repeated.
Can you guys see the slides in Zoom?
Yes.
Do we get to see the slides?
It's got to mirror the screens. It's gonna work out.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone who's in the room, we'll try to get the slides back for you as well.
It's the mirror.
I know we were going through just a little bit of the history. Again, I know this is, many of you are already familiar with this. There was a study done in 2019 that was led by CMU and the Remaking Cities Institute. They're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. That study that was put out in 2019 was one of the first steps to really look at this whole corridor and define what is the vision for it, what steps do we need to take to start thinking of this as a boulevard. There was a research and understanding report that was put out, and I know that is available from CMU. It was available on the QV COG's website. And that was the first phase. Building on that, coming out of that report, it talked about doing a proof of concept. And so what happened was the QV COG got funding from PennDOT to do this next study, which is the study we're presenting tonight. The strategic design guide, this process was done in 2021. And this was done with the support of PennDOT. This was a collaboration between Michael Baker International, Civic Design and Planning LLC, in conjunction with the Remaking Cities Institute and of course the Quaker Valley Pod. The goals of that study, it was that it identified 2 case studies and it used those case studies to develop a pattern-based approach. And these are the 4 major goals that were part of this study that was funded by PennDOT. We wanted to look at governance, at transportation, at economic growth, and at community design, and find ways to develop this toolkit to develop design principles and design improvements that can be used to accomplish those 4 goals. Again, by looking at 2 case studies, by looking at Ambridge and at Emsworth, come up with these tools that would work in those municipalities, but then would also be able to be applied to the other municipalities along the corridor. We're really looking at developing a pattern-based approach here because there are so many similarities. And these are some of the key things that came out of it. I mean, we had fantastic workshops. We had a lot of input, a lot of very detailed findings, and all of those are in the report, community by community. But the overarching themes were narrower lanes, protected turns, and advanced signage for transportation, adding green space, consistent signage and art, and extending the curves at the crosswalks for community, improving access and visibility by car and on foot, and updating zoning, 2 things that really can spur bringing more eyes to businesses and making it more desirable to spur on economic growth. And then governance principles like shared maintenance costs and corridor-wide design standards. So out of all of that and out of all of the input we received from so many of those who participated in the 2 workshops, we came up with a toolbox. We came up with a series of outcome-oriented designs paired with engineering processes to help municipalities understand how do you go after achieving and implementing this process. And then a matrix to help them understand how do these fit together, which ones can you pair with what. And at a very quick glance, here are the 10 major toolkit items that came out of that. And we're going to come back to these today because we're going to walk through them and we'd really like to hear from all of you. So our discussion will come back to all 10 of these. But we wanted to present, at a glance, what is in this report. We put together the toolbox. And along with that toolbox, we also put together this decision guide flowchart, really, that lets you look at some of the main requirements for each of those and then identify, is it appropriate in which location and which municipality? Things like, what is your right of way? Then here's something you can do. Are you looking at an intersection? Are you looking at an entire block? This decision guide is aimed at helping people understand and helping municipalities go through that toolbox and pick which tool is the best one for the right location. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Steve to talk a little bit about the standardization. I know that's a lot of stuff in the toolbox, but again, we're going to come back to that. And I wanted to talk you through what are some of the other outcomes of this report.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
The toolbox is great for giving you a whole range of design items to use for your particular municipality. We know that the corridor is not consistent along its whole way, and all of the 19 communities between Pittsburgh and Beaver that are along the Ohio River Boulevard, we know that there's variations through that. And that's where the toolbox is very important for all of you. We did find, though, that there were some items that needed to be standardized across the corridor so that one would know when you're driving on the corridor that it is the Ohio River Boulevard corridor. And we did that through 4 different items. One is the design of the roadway itself. This is the paved part that you drive on. The second were the roadway edges. These are the sides and even a median in the middle, but these are what are the locations outside of the travel lanes that you're on. Like what's the edge of the road like? The third one is signage. And we know that since there's 19 separate communities, that each one of you wants to be identified in some manner. And we have a series of recommendations on consistency of signage. And the last item is construction zone. And I'm going to talk to this one in a little bit different way because What we found with in our first phase study was that there was a need for consistency, meaning high visibility and also for safety. Those were the two major concerns. And as we know, as more assisted driving cars and eventually maybe even someday completely autonomous vehicles, there needs to be consistency so they can understand the roadway itself. And the way that the roadway is now configured and the landscaping and so on, it's difficult for self-driving cars to know where they are in some cases. So visibility is very important to maintain. So if I can have the next slide. In terms of the roadway travel lanes, we came to the conclusion that if making this a boulevard rather than a limited access highway, and for safety reasons, that there was a real need to slow down. And we heard this from both the workshops in Ambridge as well as Emsworth, and even in all aspects of the study. We consistently heard this from all of the people that attended the meetings. The speed limit right now between Bellevue and Emsworth is 40 miles an hour, and that's the narrowest part of the corridor. We felt that because it's a PennDOT road, we needed to maintain that speed as a consistent speed. There are other portions, though, go up to 45, 50, and even 55 miles an hour in some parts. But as you begin to standardize the roadway, let's say by making all the travel lanes a consistent width, that allows you then to begin to consider the road as a slower moving boulevard rather than a high speed boulevard. And so consistent by making the travel lanes 11 feet wide, this works very well in the section, the older section of the corridor up through Emsworth, and then it begins to widen out. And when the travel lanes get really wide, people speed and it becomes dangerous. And we heard that, as I mentioned, many times before. So there are 4 travel lanes. Those we propose to make them consistently 11 feet wide each for the full distance. And it's about 25 miles of roadway. We go to the next slide. The next item was, if we make all the travel lanes 11 foot wide, we're going to have some leftover space in some areas because the roadway, it's minimum about 50 feet wide on the right of way. And that's the size that you see here in Ben Avon in this slide, that the roadway itself takes up about 44, maybe 45 feet, but then there's a right of way that extends on both sides of the property of the roadway. What we wanted to use, take those sideways and begin to add aesthetics and signage and other things to make this a pleasant driving experience. So one of the things we were looking at is how could we add trees, particularly to the roadway, as nice and as beautiful as those we see in Ben Avon. However, to make it safer and so that self-driving cars as well as most drivers will be able to see people exiting their driveways and even coming into intersections, that we pull the trees back about 10 to 12 feet from the curb line of the highway. That way, everybody can see, people won't be darting out into travel lanes and so on. There'll be plenty of visualization. The other thing is, any other types of vegetation, we want to keep it planted fairly low. Because, you know, when you're sitting in a car, you're no more than about 3.5 feet off the roadway. And if you start seeing bushes that are 10 feet high, you just cannot see. So, and we found that there's a lot of instances where there's a lot of vegetation and bushes around the intersections. So our recommendations were to be consistent here, keep them low and keep them free of the corner intersections. Can I have the next slide? The third thing was signage. And we, one of our concerns was how can we make sure that everyone could be recognized and each of your municipalities really given a place in this 25 miles. And we thought that between landscaping and signage, we could do that. So what became important to us was when you enter into a new municipality, there'd be gateway signage that would identify like here on using the Borough of Ambridge's logo here, there'd be signs that would say as you enter each of these municipalities in both directions, that there'd be identification signs so people would know where they are. What also became important, and particularly when we were looking at Ambridge, were the entrances into the boroughs. These needed to be signed so that the public would know this is where we would like you to enter our community, not on some side street, which is a residential area, but onto the streets where we can accommodate you much better and make a grand entrance into the community. And then we also saw that trucks are also using a lot of times local streets. And we were very concerned that the trucks be managed off the highway so that they could not just turn onto any street, but they would only enter on streets of which were identified for truck access. So those are the three main ones. There's a few others, but these are the ones that were really important. And the last item, which is not on the next slide, is about construction zones. And this is more for the self-driving or the driver-assisted automobiles in terms of safety. When construction areas are set up along any corridor, and particularly these are on mostly the arterials and faster moving streets throughout the Commonwealth, they're not necessarily consistent. And if you were in a self-driving car or in a driver-assisted car, they need to understand that what they're entering into is not something that has been mapped before, but it may be a new thing. And so therefore, having some consistency in the distances that are set up, how the signage is placed, and other attributes for the construction zones, that there is plenty of visualization of that for these to occur. And we feel that will also be a great safety feature in the long run as well. So those are the four areas of standardization, and I just hit the main ones. There are a few more, but these are the really ones that were important, so that you would have consistency along the entire Ohio River Boulevard, know where you are, but also make it such that each of your municipalities can have their own place. I'm going to turn this over to Susan.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Kirsten. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be back in the old stomping grounds. The COG's role in this, in addition to hopefully getting the project kicked off and garnering the support and participation of experts, really was to contribute on the topic of governance and this idea of shared governance. Now, I know you're all admiring my printed version of the report. It's 148 pages. You're all welcome to print it out too, but nobody's walking out with this copy tonight. I am going to use it though. So if you look at the report, which Pat, I think you put on the website, it's an issue, so you can leaf through it. It may only ever live as a PDF in your world. The governance stuff starts pretty much towards the back. And the reason why governance is so relevant to this topic is because corridors by their nature are intergovernmental. All of you, when you got here today, traveled through several, maybe Julie didn't, but most of us traveled through several municipalities to get here. Did you walk here, Julie?
I actually did drive on 65 today.
Did you go through today? But to get here tonight, maybe not so much.
No.
But by their nature, they're intergovernmental. They are intended to connect, and it does. And it's ubiquitous. It's part of everyday life here along the Ohio River. And so governance is really relevant to any design standards that the experts come up with, any aspirations you as individual municipal officials have for your town. It's inextricably linked to the relationship with the corridor and the corridor with the municipalities along it. So we tried to address the way governance could contribute positively to a sense of place for the corridor, making the corridor safer in some of the ways that we've heard Steve talk about. We like to use the tagline, greener, cleaner, and safer for the communities. When that traffic slows down, that's also reducing emissions and it is cleaner. So We can connect the dots with our little tagline. We talked about three main areas, and I just want to touch on those and then encourage you to read the report if you would. And that is, how can the use of municipal powers contribute towards this sense of place and this cleaner, greener, safer vision? What administrative tools are available to municipalities, and what planning capabilities can be deployed in service to this vision? So I just want to run through some of those. And then if you want to click on that next slide, let's go to the next one as well. I've identified a number of these on these slides, and then the challenge that's associated with each of them. I like to alliterate, so they're all C's. The challenges are all presented as C's, things that the corridor communities will confront, will be challenged by as they move forward.
Touch the screen. Keep on.
Okay. So municipalities have a lot of local authority in Pennsylvania. They have this power to create ordinances, 30 days, 2 readings, it's law in Ambridge or Sewickley. The ordinances, if they were adopted consistently along the corridor, could be a very powerful way to achieve a shared vision. The challenge there obviously is coordination. 19 municipalities, 19 governing boards, 19 amendments to ordinances going forward. You can all imagine the challenge there. In addition to that ordinance power, though, local governments in Pennsylvania have the Intergovernmental Cooperation Act, which basically says anything a town can do by itself, it can do with its neighbors, which is very powerful. So while you are restricted with the municipal codes, what a borough can do, what a township can do, if you can form an ICA with your neighbors, you can have what results from that, have the same sort of powers and capabilities as a municipality. The challenge there with the ICAs is continuity along the corridor. Can you get 19 ICAs for every town that touches on the corridor? Land use administration is also an incredibly powerful way to achieve this vision. All municipalities in Pennsylvania have the authority to regulate land use through planning and zoning. And again, were this to be achieved in a shared vision, that could be very impactful. Again, the challenge here, I would suggest to you, is a commitment to what I want to say professional staffing. This is an area we don't tend to plan real strongly in Pennsylvania. There's not a lot of municipal planners, it's expensive. So what is that? What is our commitment to planning as a priority would be the question there. Moving on. Land use policies and funding opportunities. This gets into some detail in the report, and I'm not going to get into all of that. Here the challenge is consistency. All municipalities on the corridor have the ability to enforce the speed limit. Is there a consistent strategy around that? Are the speed patrols coordinated? Are we sharing equipment and so on? So consistently using those local policies and also coordinating your funding applications, all of that is hard to do, and consistency is the challenge. Local government honestly tends to be quite reactive, and so it takes, again, a lot of vision and a lot of coordination to accomplish something like that. Some of the administrative tools that are available, we're benefiting from one tonight. Councils of Governments, that same Intergovernmental Cooperation Act, advance the slide there, that makes intergovernmental cooperation agreements possible, makes the formation of councils of governments like the Quaker Valley COG and the Beaver County COG possible. The challenge there is capacity. Patrick, is 100% of the QV COG staff here tonight?
It is.
Yes, it is. Patrick is here. That's 100%. So how we give COGS the ability to perform municipal powers, but we don't give them municipal funding sources. So Patrick has to raise funds for all the programs that he does. So capacity in COGS is the biggest challenge. TOD is transit-oriented development, and that is, that is impactful and powerful, and there is transit on the corridor. I would say to you, the challenge around doing TOD in the corridor is competitiveness. of the corridor compared to other priorities in the region. There's no fixed guideway system. There's no busway. There's no light rail coming out the corridor. There's bus service, but there's also a lot of competition. So how competitive is the project, the TOD projects? That would be a major concern for all of you as leaders moving forward. Other programs, sorry if I'm rattling off too long of a list, I'll try to move on a little faster. You can form a transportation management agency. You can form a tourist directional sign program. These are all programs that can exist at the local level. A transportation management agency, it exists in Oakland, for example. It coordinates land use and transportation. One exists in the airport area. But you'll notice in both of those examples, there's a major employer or regional asset. So universities, the airport. So the challenge there is, do you have a case? Do you have a cause and the need for any of those things? The transit-oriented the tourist-oriented directional sign is, does somebody care enough to do it? It actually is a nice little program that you can do. The blue signs that you see when you drive around, there's a trust that administers those at the local level. I think some of the most powerful opportunities you have is this idea of interfacing with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission is the metropolitan planning organization. It coordinates transportation and transit planning and development in the region. This is only really a challenge of cooperation to speak with that single voice that Kirsten mentioned as being critical at the very beginning. Next slide, if you will. A couple other things to point out. You have planning tools at your disposal for governance that can help achieve this vision. A multi-municipal plan would serve the region well. You actually have quite a robust amount of activity in this area, in this corridor. There are 3 multi-municipal plans. There's the ASO plan. There's one between Bellevue and Avalon and a couple other communities. So can you connect the dots there would be the challenge. Integrated corridor planning, Steve's going to talk, I think Steve or Kirsten's going to talk a little bit more about that. But a 65 master plan is what we're talking about here. And, you know, that really is recommended and really would be a recommended next step. I guess the question there is the group serious? Do you have credibility with those funders and decision makers as to whether or not to make that a priority, right? Or do you have your act together? Again, very competitive funding environment. So, you know, I as far as conclusions on governance, that is paramount. The request that PennDOT complete an integrated master plan. Yeah, and one of the things I want to encourage you to take a look at in the report is a number of role model case studies that are in the back of the report. Other corridors, what made them successful? What can you learn from them? And hopefully draw some inspiration as to how you can govern, self-govern, locally govern this shared asset and opportunity. So thanks.
I do just want to echo what Susan said. There is this resource that's part of the report that she did a lot of research on, which is to assemble those case studies. So they're really very helpful. So I hope everyone does get a chance to go in and look at those. So I think she was starting to introduce this already. Governance recommendations and next steps. I think actually Susan already covered most of these. Go to PennDOT and talk about doing a master plan, an integrated master plan for the corridor. Financial support for the COGS. Big idea of having a 65 corridor commission. I know Susan covered this, so there's your conclusion there. The big thing to take away here is to not stall and let this die in the water. There's so much energy, so much effort that the communities have put in over the past few years. So keep it moving forward and use this resource and use the resource of all the people who have been putting their heads and their ideas together. Keep moving this momentum forward and having it bring impact to your communities. So if you go to the next slide. We wanted to highlight, this is in the report, all of these things come together. We wanted to highlight very clearly, what are your next steps? A master plan, an intergovernmental agreement, and local, regional, and state agencies for intergovernmental cooperation. So we do get more into the report on what those mean and how, what the partner should be, what the steps should be. But we want to make it very clear at the end of all of this work and all these ideas, what are the 3 next steps to focus on? And then if you go on beyond that, we've also identified 3 tip project recommendations, transportation improvement projects. These are things that we are highlighting out of all of the design-oriented toolkit items. These are individual things that you can do to improve the streetscape, make it safer, make it more attractive, make it, spur economic growth. Pairing those design outcomes with then the standardization piece that Steve talked about, and then also the governance piece. How do you package those together into 3 key projects that you can get funding for? What are your first 3? So the first one is to restripe the corridor for travel lanes and unsignalized intersections. So this includes things like narrowing those lanes from 12 feet, from 13 feet down to 11 feet. Narrow your lanes, have consistent striping all the way throughout, create pull-off spaces so that enforcement still has space to pull off, especially in the really long stretches where there's not an easy, there are not frequent intersections. Restripe your intersections to current standards, include those crosswalks. So that's one kind of low-hanging fruit. This would be transformational along the corridor. If you go to the next one, improve your signalized intersections. So focus a little extra attention on some of those signalized intersections where you have a traffic light, make them better and safer, make them be better gateways into the community, make them be easier and safer for pedestrians to cross. We have a number of toolkit items that talk about ways to do this. We have the standardization section gives some other standards for what sizes and dimensions you want to use. But you're looking here at installing right turn lanes so that turning traffic can pull off those through lanes a little bit sooner. Install pedestrian bulb outs so it's easier for people to cross the street and giving more space to the pedestrians. Install center medians where space allows. Can you actually have a boulevard median in the center? Again, pull out spaces on the left, pull out spaces where you have left lanes, where you have left turn lanes. At some point, you can use that space for pull off spaces when you need. That one's a little harder to explain, but we've got all that detail in the report. You can see how, depending on the right of way you have, you can use that space for various different uses along the corridor. And then install new signals and poles and pedestrian crossings. And then if you go to the last one, install wayfinding signage. And this is also kind of a fun one for the communities. This one got a lot of interest during the workshops as well. You've got great community identity. Turn that into improved wayfinding signage that connects the 19 municipalities, that has some consistent themes, some consistent artwork along each, but maybe also some unique pieces that introduce the unique character of each. Design, fabricate, and install a new wayfinding and street signage design guide for the whole corridor. So those were the 3 big projects that we took. There are so many recommendations in this report, and it's meant to be really a toolkit. Each municipality has similar characteristics, but also unique characteristics. Each municipality is going to find that slightly different solutions are the right thing for them. But these 3 overarching recommendations were the 3 that rose to the top as your kind of ready to go next projects. So if you go on, a couple of other high level conclusions, and this is a little bit more aimed at PennDOT. They did fund this study. So there are some recommendations in there for them too. A separate corridor classification is needed. The current classification for corridors does not take into consideration that roads like Route 65 are main streets for some communities, and there are arterials between communities, and the PennDOT system, road classification system, doesn't really acknowledge that you can have roads that are major connectors that are also your town main streets. They don't give you ways to control to lower speed, for example. So they need a new classification system. They need to develop and adopt corridor-specific guidelines in response to that new classification, and then work with the municipalities to develop a corridor master plan. And this has been delivered to PennDOT as well. This is a report that they sponsored, and they have these recommendations as well. So if you go to the next one. We gave the high-level walkthrough of everything that came out of that report, everything that you can find if you go in and you'd like to read more, go and see the toolkit, see the case studies, see those specific standards that were developed throughout this report. The entire document is posted on ISU, like Susan said, and that link is available through the QDCOG website. So with that, we do have some chat comments too, so we're going to see if we have any questions in the chat. That was 7:10. Hopefully that was what we resolved back at the beginning. That concludes our formal presentation style format here of going through what is in this report. And we wanted to shift more of a conversation discussion format, questions, answers. If you all have any questions about any of the things that were presented, we're actually going to go, we have a series of slides that we'll go through to frame our discussion. If you want to go ahead to the next one.
Well, do we want to ask if anybody has any comments online?
I have a question. So I'm not Sabella from Philip Township. I guess I love the proposal of not stalling and then making progress. This is great. So we don't have much experience with the TIP and how to make recommendations. So what would you say? Do we need to partner with you guys, or maybe it's a biased answer, but I don't know, like, what would you say are the next step to go from this? And let's say the cost is like, we love recommendations 1 and 3, and we want to push this hard. What do we do?
There are a couple ways you could go about that, but having a clear project in mind that you want and having some community consensus and a document to back it up will help you position yourself for funding. And your best bet there is to find one of the big sources to support it. And that would be probably a PennDOT. You could go to try to take this with PennDOT and ask them to help you take the next step. Or the other one that Susan mentioned is the regional planning organization, SPC, is also a fantastic resource to help work with you to get that TIP project
The
funded.
process is kind of flexible, if I hear you correctly. There's not an application, formal application that you need to do. It basically talking to the right people, it sounds like.
There are, as every grant has an application, a formal application,
Okay.
but there are several different grants that you could go
Gotcha.
after.
But it's multiple layered, and for the most part, having, like you're gonna say, having some sort of a vision does help. So that's obviously where you need to engage someone that can help you coming up with that vision. Having the toolkit, for example, as a starting point, does help you a lot. So you already have, those tools that you go to someone and say, I would like something like this implemented here. But of course, then you need to figure out, how to fund that initial study. But usually, once you have some of that stuff done, then yes, you can go and apply to a lot of different funding sources, and there are tons of them.
So one quick one. Oh, promise. So the toolbox that was developed, is that new to this study, or is it something generic that you guys took from another source?
It is new to this study. Now, a lot of the things that are in there they are not unheard of. They are good street design and transportation design principles, but were created, customized to this process. That toolkit was developed through the workshops that we had with participants from Hemsworth and Cambridge, and they were developed specifically to respond to the issues and the needs of this corridor and of the communities along the corridor.
That's awesome.
You had mentioned Hemsworth and Ambridge. Were the study for this report focused in terms of what the issues are, and then it would be extrapolated to the whole 25-mile corridor? Is that how it works?
Yeah, and Susan can certainly talk to that one too. You-
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we would have loved to done 19, right, for each municipality, but we were constrained with funding
Right.
and time.
Right.
So we tried to pick towns that were emblematic of situations along the corridor. One of the things that's we looked for was development on both sides of the corridor, for example. So both Emsworth and Ambridge have uses on both sides of the corridor, although they're very different. So that, and plus, one was in Allegheny County, one was in Beaver County. We certainly think we've heard from the participants, and I think in the report, there's lots of replicable ideas. And I think that also speaks to the question John Sebastian was asking, how do you get going? How do you get the momentum? We were talking with Mario about kind of if this is golf, he has a couple, chips that he wants to get going right away. He's hopefully going to use this report to make the case for some of those projects. That momentum can build, right, and can be replicated. So to the extent that both those towns have similar experiences up and down the corridor, that's how it was Emsworth and Ambridge.
And actually we'll get to that in a sec, but just in the 2019 phase 1 study that was done by the Remaking Cities Institute, they looked at all of those municipalities and they took stock of the different conditions that exist, and then that helped lead to the selection of Ambridge and Emsworth, because they were looking for situations where you had development on both sides, but also different kinds of conditions. So one town that was very mixed use, that had a lot of commercial activity, one town that was more of a residential, bedroom commuter community. They were looking for a couple of different, they kind of put communities into several different types of patterns, and then selected 2 different patterns to use for the case studies. And there's another question?
Yeah, I'm Dave Wagner, live here locally, right by the boulevard, actually. And in terms of process, are you guys doing a similar presentation at the other 18 jurisdictions as well? Are they getting a similar, or is this it?
You guys just have a lovely library.
So I read through the report, I skimmed through it, so it's exhaustive, right? So great job. And no, I know, I say it's a great, really thorough, exhaustive report. And I wonder, I don't know if the Council of Governments, maybe you can help me out, but this sounds, anytime you say master plan, especially in this political climate, I would say good luck trying to work with 18 other jurisdictions to get any kind of unified, concept across. That sounds really overwhelming for people who have these volunteer, government jobs, right? So maybe it could work out, that's great, but is there a way that, swiftly or Killbuck or somebody, one of these, jurisdictions can do something on their own to get, use this momentum, capitalize on it, right? And also then serve as a model of, there's some small things that can work, right? Because honestly, the boulevard's now just kind of scary. It's hard to pull, there's so many issues with it that it's kind of gone too far, right? And it has changed.
So I wouldn't extrapolate the, federal climate right now to how the COG is working. I think we're very united.
Okay.
So if there's something that can be done, it's within our group, so.
Oh, wow, okay, great.
Yeah.
All right.
I have some practical questions about that, actually. My name's Julie, I'm from Sewickley. And Barbara Carrier is also here on the Zoom call. She's the new president of the COG, QV COG. And I'm the vice president. And Barbara and I were talking today about what our priorities are going to be for the QV COG this year. And we really were highlighting the Route 65 project because it is the shared asset. It is the #1 shared asset. Our communities are very different, as you get into them and look at them individually. But so this is something that can bring our communities together. But my question, I guess, is more practically speaking, like everybody who's in the COG, who's a delegate for the COG, is a volunteer. And they're also on the council for their individual municipalities. So we're also focused on just the things we're doing for our own neighborhoods. So how can we, like this seems like a full-time job to me to focus on that. I think I don't see how I could focus on that. I mean, I think that COG can focus on it as a group. We can prioritize it for the year and prioritize it during our monthly meetings. But how can we, how can we work this into our monthly work in a way that's manageable? And how can we work with the commission? What is the commission going to do for us? How would we form a commission and how would we work with them so that there's more people working on it?
I think
Yeah, I have a couple, I see those two questions as related. So you're right, one of the recommendations is this idea of a 65 corridor commission. Wow, that sounds like a big deal, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons for that being the recommendation is to get many hands, right? Many hands make light work. This COG is sort of a single stakeholder group, governments, right? But there are others along the corridor, you know, community assets, cultural resources, business, right? That could lend momentum and support for a corridor campaign, right, to improve the corridor. As far as what does a busy municipality do, is sort of working that into its day-to-day business. I would suggest, you know, look closely at the governance section of the report.
Okay.
One of the first steps in the recommendations is, you know, adopt an intergovernmental cooperation agreement to ask for the integrated plan from PennDOT. Just get the agreement, right, that we're all going to ask for the same thing. That's a small step to get started to build that momentum.
And we can do that within the COG.
You can do that within the COG. The COG could champion that up and down the corridor. And the only act that the municipality has to do is actually state that commitment, right? And then build on that. And then, Mario, do you want to talk about your idea for how you're thinking about the 8th Avenue, how you might use information from this report to piggyback on a project you're already doing, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot?
Yeah, no problem, sure. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ambridgeboro, but 2 years ago, a little over 2 years now, they completed the streetscape from 4th to 8th Street. Saw an abundance energy and growth just through the streetscape. Council wanted to pursue that streetscape from 8th through 12th in the historic district. We were fortunate to be able to refinance some of our existing debt and get the funding of approximately $3 million that we're going to allocate to that and do that. During that initiation of refinancing the bond, this study was going through and saw these visuals of improving our gateway into the town. So actually, 2 weeks ago, we did an RFP for our streetscape, and we also included the gateway of 8th Street from 65 into that, which obviously is going to boost the cost of the project from probably $3 million to $3.5 million. But I've included it in that RFP in the streetscape study, and hopefully to leverage some PennDOT multimodal funding through the FA to do it. We have this study to leverage it and then move it a little bit, tweak the design a little bit more to make it blend into the Merchant Street corridor. So we're already tapping it. And I hope that, you know, depending on the consultant that we pick, you know, if we can stretch it not only to the 8th Street gateway, but in this proposal, there was some terms of the Old Economy District gateway as well, and then one at 4th. So depending on how successful we are in obtaining additional grant funding, I'll try to leverage it as far as I can. So Ambridge is already going to capitalize on the work done, and we would certainly partner with Quaker Valley College to with any resolution on getting PennDOT, you know, on board with the massive. Yeah, and I think, you know, out of this, I think, you know, the next steps, we have the plan and the study. I think we get SBC in a room with the local state representatives and senators along that corridor and talk about this. And, well, I mean, this was awesome. I don't see who wouldn't support funding to dig deeper into this, to, push PennDOT to.
So we have one of your Pennsylvania House members. So it's great that she was able to join tonight.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Andrew Sanders there.
We also have Senator Devin Robinson here.
Welcome.
The masked man in the back. We
Yeah.
don't recognize you, sir.
Well, I know that
Yeah.
Representative Gatos and I, we've been talking about this. So we're ready to advocate. I mean, this is, you guys are doing, I wish everybody who came to us looking for grant money would do these studies and have something that we could present to, our chain of command. So her and I have a good relationship, and I have decent relationships too with everybody down the Route 65 corridor. So whenever it comes time, we'll all go and advocate. So,
So are you open to suggestion?
yeah.
So one of the things that's recommended in the study is PennDOT will support obviously planning, right, integrated plan. But sort of that support for the local champion to coordinate that, right? That's not very much. The COGS total intake for this was about $25,000, right? But there was a lot of value run out of that. But they do have to support, the ability to get those 19 intergovernmental cooperation agreements. And, transportation agencies like to plan, like to do projects, but there really is a lot of coordination that if there can be some support generated for those, they call them soft skills, but they're very hard to do, right? And they're crucial to get the project off the ground. So if that's a way that maybe you can help the COG and the communities, I think that would be,
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
special.
Sure.
I also want to address our other question here that's on Zoom. Someone was asking about, a few there now, someone was commenting on the funding that was awarded. And I think one thing that's important to mention is that transportation projects are very expensive, and you're talking about a long corridor. So the amount of funding that was put into the planning study may seem like a big number, but it really isn't. So what happened with this grant, and I can only speak to one of those, the portion for this portion of the study that we were involved in, but this initial planning phase becomes a toolkit that all communities can use to position yourself for much more funding and to advocate. Like it was just said, it's so much easier to go to your legislators, to go to the state, to go to PennDOT and ask for the funding to do major transportation projects when you've got a planning report like this that's based in community input and that's based in that cooperation amongst the municipalities that positions you to be able to qualify for much more funding building off of that. So that was a first step, and that is what happened in putting together this study, which was a collaboration between the QVCOG and Michael Baker and CMU's Remaking Cities Institute. So I'm not sure if we can see all the comments that are on Zoom. So remind me or read out if there's anything that we've missed.
So one of the questions on there is about historical assets like Old Economy Village. Again, small steps. Tourist destination signs, somebody has to be a trustee for those, right? It sounds like just signs. It's not. It's really about what are those cultural assets that we as a region want to take stewardship for and steer activity towards. And that's something that's a small program. It's not a very big program that could be run by the two COGs or collaboration between the two COGs that would, again, gets small steps started to get some momentum going. So I think that definitely it was appreciated that there are great historical assets and Old Economy Village is special. And one of the suggestions in the governance was to build on that.
I'd
There's
just
also,
like to-
yes, Steve, go ahead.
I would just like to add one more thing. This study, the strategic design guide, was a prelude to doing a master plan. And once you can get in, PennDOT Connects is the one to fund a master plan for you. Once you start doing a master plan, all of the details of each of the 19 communities would be taken into account. And therefore, Old Economy Village is a major historic asset for the entire corridor, but it's also an issue for how transportation works in the Ambridge area. And we know that there's problems with access into the Old Economy historic area. It's basically residential streets, and how do you direct traffic and so on. That is the kind of thing that a master plan will take into account. But right now we were looking for how can we get 19 communities to be on the same page so that so that all of you could speak as one voice with PennDOT and make this process a lot easier for all of you.
Yeah, and to prime that pump, to begin to reimagine it differently. I mean, that was my experience. You know, I was the executive director of the COG for a number of years. And the boulevard is ubiquitous. You know, it's an obstacle to get around. It's also a pain in our butt, but it's also the thing that connects us. Our economic vitality depends upon it. So, you know, this report really is just the beginning. That integrated master plan is really what you're going to see meaningful recommendations come out of. This is to prime the pump in many ways.
Was also asked earlier, what can individual municipalities do? Because it can be hard or take time to get those collaborative agreements on board, and are there things that you can do? And absolutely there are. The way this is put together, it is a toolkit, which has lots of individual items that, you know, it is structured for each of the municipalities to be able to take it and apply it as you see fit. The intergovernmental agreements and the idea of having an integrated corridor plan is definitely one of the, you know, primary recommendations of this, but all of those toolkit items are available to all the municipalities. They are deliberately laid out in a way that's not linked to one specific place. They're prepared as a menu of options with guides on how to apply them and where to apply them. So if an individual municipality or if two municipalities are willing to start on something together, this is absolutely a resource that you can use to decide, you know, we'd like to start with these small steps while we work on the big ones.
And if I can just real quickly also suggest, let's spend a little time talking about the tip suggestions here, because they are very introductory projects. I think that, you know, the big thinkers at CMU and the great expertise and depth of Michael Baker, which is just very impressive, they can come up with a lot of highfalutin projects, right? They have scaled these very attainable to what you all can achieve here in the corridor. So I just wanted to suggest if we could focus on that a little bit, that might help make it real.
We can go back to those. I see we have someone with their hand up too, if we'd like to call on them.
Yeah, Kara, you want to unmute yourself, please? You seem to be muted.
No, we're not hearing you.
We'll scroll over Steve and see, because we know we can hear Steve. That's different about
Yeah,
this.
we're not getting your audio.
No, we can hear Steve. Steve, can you say something?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Oh, okay, so it's not us.
Still hear Steve.
Nothing mysterious.
Well, perhaps Kara can use the chat if she's. See if she's able to get sound, but she can use the chat and we'll read out her question.
Should we go to chat then? Well, Kara types your question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Chad Ferguson. I live in Ben Haven. I live right on Ohio River Boulevard, and I appreciate all of the time and effort that seems to have been put into this presentation and the thought that's gone into this. When I first heard about this, I was very optimistic, thinking, oh, this is great. This is an opportunity to maybe make the boulevard safer for me and for my children and for my neighbors and their children. And from what I'm seeing here, it seems like you want to take probably the most dangerous stretch of road in Allegheny County, which is Emsworth to Bellevue, and extrapolate that all throughout the 25 miles of Ohio River Boulevard. And the reason why it's so dangerous is you're mentioning that the lanes are 11 feet wide. There's no way the lanes in front of my house are 11 feet wide. They're probably maybe 6 or 6.5 feet wide. Like I can't pass a tractor trailer unless there's not another car coming the other direction. So I just think that, and part of the reason why it's so dangerous is it is a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, but cars consistently go 60, 65, even 70 miles an hour on that stretch of road. We have tractor trailers, which should never be allowed on that road, just because, they're just, the lanes, quite frankly, are not wide enough to admit that type of vehicle. So, I think that I just don't understand the sense of the project. If the idea is to make the lanes more narrow, reduce the speed limit to 40 miles an hour on the sections of the boulevard where the traffic does move a little faster. And again, I live in Ben Avon. It's a very residential section of road. It is kind of, it's a little different than other parts of the boulevard, which is more industrial or more commercial. But it is just, it's a little concerning to me that that's the stretch of road. That's the sort of the model that you want to set for the whole boulevard. I know it looks nice. The homes are beautiful in Van Avon. People take care of their homes for the most part, take pride in their homes. But again, there is no error on either side of any of those lanes. There's not a shoulder. There's no room to put a shoulder. And it really, quite honestly, that 2.5, 3 mile stretch of road really has no business even being a 4-lane highway. It should be a 2-lane road. And then you can maybe make them 11 feet wide. So again, I love progress. I love the potential for expansion and growth and making things safer and looking nicer. But I think just you have to be pragmatic about something that that's this big of an undertaking. And I just think that if the model that you're looking to extrapolate for the entire boulevard is, again, probably the most dangerous 2-mile stretch of road in Allegheny County. And I've been here for about 10 years, and I've seen my share of accidents right in front of my house. And I do get very nervous about when my kids turn 16 and making sure that they know how to properly enter onto the highway. But I just think that again, not to keep saying this, but I just think it's a very dangerous stretch of road, and I don't necessarily think that that's the stretch of road that you want to use as the kind of the standard bearer for the rest of the boulevard. Again, aside from it just being aesthetically pleasing, which it is, it's very nice. There's a lot of beautiful homes along that stretch, but I just think that one thing they could do is actually enforce the speed limit on this road. In the mornings when my children get on the school bus driver has to honk at traffic that just blows right by her stop sign on the side of her bus because they're rushing and they're going 60, 65 miles an hour to rush to work or to get north. So I think that, there are some smart choices just to make it a little bit safer, at least. That would include flashing signs or maybe just, like I said, maybe just reducing the speed limit down to 35 miles an hour, because if you're going to make the lanes, 11 feet wide and that much more narrow, or the width that they are in front of my house, cars shouldn't even be going 40 miles an hour when it's that narrow. Like I said, there is no margin for error. There are telephone poles literally 3 feet off of not the shoulder of the road, but the outside of the lane. So if you hit ice or you do anything like that, you're really asking for trouble. So again, I would just ask to kind of consider that as they're trying to put this proposal together or put this proposal into motion.
So Chad, this is Peter. If I could, sorry, Barbara, you want to say something?
Yes, because I'm sorry to interrupt. One of the things that Patrick did, I asked Patrick to do, because speeding and enforcement on the boulevard is a problem and it makes it not safe. We did have a meeting of various municipalities. We looked from Emsworth. We were primarily, because most of the people there were in the Quaker Valley region, looked from Emsworth on, but came up with some thoughts, and communities are discussing this separate from this program about how the police forces, and the police were there at this meeting also, speaking how difficult it is to, regulate the speed on the boulevard from the time they leave the city to the time even up through Beaver County, when they leave Allegheny County. One suggest there's no pull off for the police. It's very difficult and dangerous for them to regulate this road. And you're absolutely correct, Chad. It's difficult. Some suggestions came out of that the police force maybe can. Part of the trouble is we all have separate police forces. That, in talking with one another, maybe one day, sometimes just seeing a police car there will slow down traffic. And somebody doesn't even have to be in it. It could be in a Bellevue, or it could be up around Emsworth or in Swickley. So I must say that is a concern. I mean, narrowing the lanes, as in this study, has found to slow traffic down. But you're right, in Ben Avon, it is very narrow. And it is, again, there's no way you could pull anybody over.
Right. Well, I know Barbara, and thank you for.
Sorry, Chad, I'm sorry. Can we just give somebody else a chance real quickly, and then we'll come back to you in a second.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The earlier study in your comments were, there's a big toolbox out there. So I think that's the idea here, is figure out what would work. And to me, I kind of come full circle. Initially, I was like a little pessimistic about making this work, but reading Representative Gale's comments about wanting to work with her counterpart, see her phone number out. How in are you with this whole thing?
Yeah, I'm in whatever.
So to me, if nothing else comes of it, there's some momentum here to at least move forward with the study and get in front of the right people, and then figure out details like Chad and Kara recommend. I mean, I hear you, I'm not dismissing those at all, just there's a lot of things.
I would
in place
agree.
and
The other part is we're working within the constraints of what the boulevard is for PennDOT, right? This is not like we could go 25 miles an hour and call it done. I mean, there's a lot of requirements that those experts have looked at, so.
Yeah, and that's
Reading
exactly.
a report is gonna help in understanding the background.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna say. The idea, what we call it a toolkit and not a master plan for this community, is because we extracted the DNA of the issues of that area. And then we said, what are some of the suggestions, best practice that have been going around to make those solutions actually work? And the idea would be that, we could get those toolkit and use it anywhere else. So it's not, even though, you are seeing pictures of different parts of your communities, different communities, but the idea is, in general, these are some of the toolkits that could help it for XYZ reasons. Having said that, I actually measure some of your travel lanes, and for example, in Emsworth, and there are 13-foot travel lanes. And if you think about a 13-foot travel lane, and I have a diagram here where the FWHO, which is the Department of Transportation, National Transportation, that gives the standards for highway, their travel lanes are supposed to be 12 feet. So 12-foot travel lane, that equals 65 miles per hour. So if you make it wider than 12 feet, that means cars are going to go even faster. And in some places, you have very, very tight right of way. So if you're increasing the right of way of those travel lanes, not only they cost a lot more money, but cars are going to go a lot faster. So there are multiple ways. The best practice are, number one is you actually change the perception of the driver. So driver starts to slow down. And one of the ways they slow down is by necking it down and make it tighter, so that they seem like they're going into a place that is a lot tighter than, than 13 feet, So that's where the 11-foot travel lane, and actually in most cases in the United States, they're going down to 10 foot 6 inches. Okay, because if you think about it, a car is actually 7 foot 6 inches, thereabout. So even at 10 foot 6 inches, they still get 3 feet on either side. Yes, I'm talking about a car, right? Route 65, actually, there are a lot of trucks. That's the reason why you think of 11-foot travel lanes, which is actually a standard for a lot of places in the United States. So increasing the travel lanes, it's not going to give you any kind of safety. Putting putting more signage, putting a whole bunch of signs that says it's 25 miles per hour, putting speed bumps, just go into Squirrel Hill, there are tons of speed bumps all over the place, and what you're gonna find is a car, they go off, they take off, they hit the speed bump, they take off, and they land, and when they crash, they actually start to eat into the road. Because nothing stops cars, nothing stops speed better than a very well-designed road. And wide road equal faster speed. That is just, it's not, it's just basic human beings all over the world.
Well, and
I
just,
think that Chad brings up a very good point, though. PennDOT sets the speed limit, and unless you as a collective can muster yourselves to make a good case for slowing it down, they will listen to you. But for us to recommend that the speed limit be lowered below the 40-mile minimum, which is the speed limit for the slowest speed for the entire corridor, that was not something that we felt was important to take on at this point. However, once you start getting into and doing the differential plans for each of the communities, here's where you as constituents and so on can begin to make a difference. If the right way to do the Ben Avon is a 2-lane roadway through that area, then maybe that's the thing that comes out of the master plan. And I think that might be an exception, but I think understanding the value of having a plan that all of you can agree with in the long run is the important aspect here.
And the idea of going to 2 lanes in some areas did come up in the workshops.
it did.
Nothing in this report is intended to say, or does say that it has to be the same width all the way through. In fact, it is very intentional about giving different scenarios and different solutions you can use when you have different widths and different numbers of lanes that you need. So not every solution will be the same in every community. That we want each community to be able to look at that toolkit and decide what is right for you. But then there are some things that we have gone and looked at and thought that these things should be the focus of standardization. So an 11-foot lane, consistent wayfinding, those are things that would really benefit from consistent standardization. And the mention of PennDOT is there in the comments, and that's very important to remember. They do put substantial limits on what they will allow you to do, but they are partnering on this.
Yeah.
They funded this project, and they are hopefully open to continuing to work with all of you to find ways to move forward.
Yeah, and I think the lesson that the way the road functions in that stretch that Chad is referring to that's the history right there of why they are now seeking to partner better with local communities, because those are standards that they kind of slapped on from on high over the years. You look at that stretch, as it runs through Avalon, that's widened out so that it can be much more of a commercial. So they're picking up speed through there, right? And then as Chad points out, it hits the more undulating part of the boulevard, which was designed intentionally like that. I mean, the history there is between the two wars, the North Boroughs asked for the boulevard. They thought it was going to be leisure driving, right? And then when it got turned over to the state, it got sort of handled with a cookie cutter approach, and we got to where we are right now. So I guess I make that history book story to talk about how the governance is so crucial to getting the outcomes that you want, because you have more influence than you think. I said one of the things that I thought would be a challenge for this project would be credibility, right? Can the region organize itself and speak with that one voice that it is credible in those higher, more bureaucratic, higher, not in the sense of better, but just up the funding and governance ladder to be responsive to that. I think that is your challenge.
I think Chad, sorry, you still have your hand up, right? You have something you wanted to
I'm
add?
sorry. No, I'm sorry. I just didn't pull it back down. I apologize.
Oh, okay, no worries. I just
So
want
I
to make sure I
have one
can.
more thing on the speed thing, and I'm sorry, I'll let you, I've talked to many elected officials as part of the COG, and the one thing that they were scared about was the fact that there's so many cars on 65 Like, we're not gonna create a bottleneck, and now we're gonna have cars idle in front of my house because at some point in Ben Haven, it's only 25, and now you've got thousands of cars that need to go through at rush hour. So again, that's why I appreciate exactly the constraints you guys have to work with. And again, we need to let just as many cars fluently go through this corridor and not generate more pollution.
Well, and the heavy hauler is a good question. We didn't attempt to handle that here, but certainly that was something we heard, is that the trucks are, problematic. Are there alternatives? 376, as you're coming down 79, it's just a couple more exits down the road. That kind of thing could be fleshed out in real meaty detail in an actual plan.
One of the things that came out of the workshop discussions in those two case studies, particularly in Ambridge, we talked about the truck routes. And while the toolkit really focuses on the corridor itself, that's what we were funded to look at. Those workshops got into really thinking about the impact of traffic going in and out of the community as well. And one of the things that was talked about were how some of these same toolkit items can also be applied just off of the corridor into the municipality to also help slow down traffic going in and discourage trucks where you don't really want them to go. If you want to highlight a preferred route for them and keep them off your main street or residential street, there are ways to do that.
Yeah, and I do like Kara's reverse psychology, where she says if speed limit was 25 miles per hour, maybe cars will go 40 instead of 60. Yeah, that's a good point. But actually, in that, her point actually reminds me of something. So, I was talking to a traffic engineer once, and what he said is that traffic is just like water. There's actually a sweet spot, a sweet speed that which you increase the traffic flow, because remember, if you're doing 60 miles per hour, you're supposed to have what, 10 cars in front of you? So that is not a very well use of that piece of highway. So I asked him, so what is the right speed for cars to go? Meaning that you have the right amount of car in front of you, distance and all the stuff. And he says it's about 30 miles per hour. So with 30 miles per hour, you have the optimal throughput of one travel lane versus 60 miles per hour. So even though it's completely opposite, but think about it, we are supposed to leave 10 cars in front of us. And so that in it alone just throws the whole math equation out the window. But I like Kara's idea better.
And if people are going that fast, it doesn't matter what businesses
Yeah,
you
please,
have
sorry.
or signs. right? No
I
one can
also
see
live
them.
in Ben Haven. I don't live on the boulevard, but if you look at the Ben Haven section, and even it starts in Avalon, as someone mentioned, is like a speedway.
Mhm.
I mean, when I go for a walk and I walk along the boulevard, I feel like I want to get sucked into the velocity of the cars going behind me. But my point is that every section of that boulevard, even if you look just a little further, what direction is that, north, into Emsworth has a business district, and then a small portion of it is that really divided 4-lane highway. So not having a consistent 45 miles an hour speed limit through that whole thing is just one strategy that would really achieve, that let's look at how this portion of road is used, what's around it, as you had mentioned earlier, and adapt so that we're not doing, it's gotta be a sugar cookie, and that's all, the only kind of cookie we have.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. Coming from Avalon at 40 miles an hour, nobody wants to slow down. You want to keep going, right? And
Right.
Therefore, you just break.
And then it gets nice and curvy, so cars even think, oh, I'm on a speed track.
Yeah.
No, and that's exactly the way that roads were originally designed. They were designed, if you think about it, back in the days before highway were around, you had a main road that connected all the towns. Now, when you're entering into a town, you had the really nice, columns on both sides, welcome to our town. And then all of a sudden it'll narrow down. I mean, a perfect example that's still kind of there is Alexandria in Virginia. That's exactly what they do. It starts to neck down, you go into the main street. I mean, they blew out the highway, that's a different story, but for another day. But the idea is you go through this, it's a progression of road width. And it's telling you something. It's telling you slow down because there are people who live here very close to the road. The problem is, like, Susan is saying, everybody else is saying, is if you just use the one size fits all, you do it 40 miles per hour the whole entire thing, it doesn't work. And so it really is about crafting the road to the conditions of where it's at and next to where it's at.
There's also an aesthetic, aspect to how 65 was designed. I mean, we've been in Pittsburgh for 25 years, but only have been having 6. And when you come out of the city, you notice the London plane or the sycamore trees on either side that I think continued. I'm not sure how
Yes,
far.
they
this
were. Those are the
continued.
original, those
But
trees, and there's some.
That gives you a sense of boulevard, you know, which is more that, this is a residential area. Yes, we're moving traffic through, but, you know, it's also a beautiful drive. It's no longer beautiful.
No, and I mean, there's something that it tells you, like, you see the houses, you see the porch, you see the walkway, you're like, there's a kid that could open that door and run out, you know, and so for me, actually, the first time I drove around Route 65, I was actually nervous wreck when I was passing through that area, because I had to hurry up because there were cars behind me honking the horn, but I felt like there's a kid running out, you know? And then there are other portions, you're like, oh yeah, this is a highway. And well, don't even get me started around Manchester. That is a highway.
So if you get a chance, it's winter, so you have lots of time, hopefully, to watch old videos of the workshops. You know, all the intelligence about what needs to happen to the corridor is in the communities themselves. This topic, what we're talking about, you know, that stretch from Emsworth to the 79 bridge, people go 70 miles an hour there. What came out of the discussion, which is embodied in this report, but not probably as interactively as those sessions were, is people said, we want to get people slowing down sooner. We want them to slow down near the Killbuck landslide before they get to Emsworth, right? We want to start. And so you'll see in that's one of the recommendations is that say, hey, I'm entering a town now. I'm not just proceeding on that 70 mile an hour road I was on. And oh, holy cow, there's a red light here. I mean, how many of us have come up to that light in the left lane and been looking in our rearview mirror that entire time because you know, that's the stretch that people are going so fast on, yet there is a light right
And
there.
I'm usually trying to take a left there.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
To come back in.
Yeah.
It is because
It
I
is.
see these cars coming up, realize that I'm taking a left and, you know, moving up right
Right.
over and who knows who's in that
Right,
other lane.
Or who's behind them, you
Yes.
know,
And
who
that's-
doesn't see it.
Yeah.
That's so scary.
And that's the reason why, for example, in Ambridge, we actually drew up a couple of intersections in Ambridge, because that's exactly what happens. You are on 65 going northbound, you're supposed to make a right turn into a residential. You're going 65, making a right turn at what, 30 miles per hour into a residential 18?
That
Supposed
is
to be.
the bridge from Avalon essentially into Ben Ave. If you're gonna take a right on Dixon, we have friends who visit us and said, that is a scary place to take.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it happens over and over again on that border.
This is also one of the reasons why going to PennDOT, doing something like a coordinated master plan, lets you really think about things along the corridor, because you don't just want to slow people down once. If you only put one thing in one place that makes them slow down, well, they see that, they slow down a bit, as soon as they get past it, they hit the gas again. So then you have to start doing it repeatedly if you want them to stay slow. But, you know, if you're gonna do something repeatedly, you wanna be coordinated about it. You wanna find where is the right place to get them to be slowing down for this intersection, before that bridge, at this dangerous spot, when we know that people go into that blind curve and they take it too fast. You wanna take a coordinated approach at that if possible, and that's where something like, you know, an intergovernmental agreement to work together and go after doing a master plan together would really help you identify how to make all those movements together that slow people down throughout.
Or as Susan mentioned, you could have more landslides. That really worked too.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I apologize for that reference.
That worked though, that worked.
That was number
What
one.
I meant to say was the future solar array. That's what I meant to say.
I do want to say too, we have some comments on the Zoom
No,
about
we're-
trees, and we have shown examples for future, you know, if you're going to put in new trees, or if you're going to do changes to areas where there's space, don't put the trees too close to the road, but none of that is meant to say you're gonna get rid of what's already there. Don't want anyone to be
so-
scared by that.
Yeah, there was a comment on there in regards to, you know, PennDOT owning Route 65. How does that work with the local municipality? Trying to get that work done and navigated. I can go back to my days in Monaca Borough as the manager. Our main street, Pennsylvania Avenue, is a state route. And basically downtown Monaca converges Route 51 and Route 18, come down, they go over each of the respective bridges. And then the section in between those two is a 4-digit route. I can't remember it, but it's a state road. We did our master plan, wanted to do a streetscape. A lot of accidents down at the 17th Street. Those who are familiar with downtown Monaca, it's where the Yolanda's restaurant is. Through our study, it advocated that we should be looking to put a roundabout there. So through the will of the municipality and the council, we kept pushing for it, secured a $3 million DCD funds, as well as $1 million in SBC funds, and then a multimodal, I believe it was a CFA multimodal, amassed the $4.5 million to do this project, all led and initiated by the municipality. We're ready to go. Now we're going to put this bid out for the roundabout, and PennDOT said, time out, this is our project. But it's happening, it's moving forward, and quite frankly, as the borough manager, I really didn't want to oversee and be the project manager for a $4.5 million roundabout that's a state road. So, I mean, that's how it's done. It's pushed up from the community. And as you get that ball rolling, PennDOT will come on board if you're showing that this is what the people in the community want. So hopefully that provides some insight.
Thank you.
Can you just one more time run through the tip recommendations so they now have a little more context in terms of what those suggestions were from the study authors? Can you minimize that chat? Just again, just restate those, Kirsten, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah, so one of the first ones that came out is to restripe the Route 65 corridor for travel lanes and unsignalized intersections. So that restriping, that does reflect a standardization concept of going to 11-foot lanes, not having areas where the lanes go to 12 or 13 feet, lane width that is highway standard or larger than highway standard. That allows people to think this is a high-speed road. And then they get to, one of the municipalities and the lane width goes down to 11, but they're hitting that at high speeds. So just going to a consistent 11-foot width and getting rid of that extra space, that is one of the recommendations. That's a fairly straightforward project to go after. And in conjunction with that, you could add additional turn lanes, turn lane striping where you have additional space. There are areas along 65. And again, it varies along the corridor. You don't have the same space everywhere. There are plenty of areas where you've got a wide enough shoulder to use some of that extra space and have a turn lane that helps get people off of the busy route when they're trying to turn into a residential neighborhood. And then restriping as part of this, restriping your travel lanes and restriping your unsignalized intersections. So when you don't have a stoplight, you have clear striping on the ground to indicate when people need to slow down the turn, to indicate nice high visibility sidewalk, crosswalks, so that if people are trying to cross, maybe not across Route 65, there are some locations where that's suitable. There are other locations where they might not be crossing at an unsignalized crosswalk, but they might be crossing the side street. And they're not always very clear crosswalks there. And so someone who is trying to turn off of the corridor, who's arriving at high speed, they might not notice that there's someone trying to cross that side street. Creating pull-off spaces for violation enforcement, that's come up a few times this evening. And it came up a lot in the workshops as well. It's difficult to enforce the speed because even the police find it difficult to pursue and to drive and to be able to stop people if there's not a place to stop. And so identifying some locations where you have enough space or you have enough shoulder to identify some pull-off spaces where they can pull out of the main travel lanes. That would be a part of that could be a part of this project. And then lowering speed limits in high accident locations. That can be a little more difficult to do with PennDOT, but when there are some areas where you can lower it, and if you have good documentation and a good argument, you can work with PennDOT on trying to lower the speed limit.
For transportation experts, is photo radar giving you tickets by mail? Is that legal in Pennsylvania? Because I've seen some in New York City and they're not in Pennsylvania.
Just the red light cameras.
Okay.
I know the report's completed, but just a suggestion and you know, advocating restriping or the intersections, but something that I think is effective is, and we're talking about speed limit, actually putting the speed limit on the surface of the road. Maybe more people would pay attention, just seeing it. Because you can put a gazillion signs on the side, no one's paying attention to those. But sometimes seeing it there, even slow, every.
Well, that's because they do that in school, on school district too, on schools, right? So I guess people just like get scared whenever they see something on the road.
Yeah, I think the road kind of captures people. So I don't know, I'm not a traffic, but I know my behavior when I see it there kind of gets me, but this up here.
People don't pay as much attention to signs, especially on the side, and they drive or feel comfortable. And that's why if you're saying the design of the road is so much more important in guiding how fast people drive than just the sign.
Well-
You tell people to go 20, but if it is a highway, they're not gonna go 20.
No, and you know, and let's be honest, it's a tunnel vision that we all get when the faster you go, the more tunnel vision you end up having because you're just worried about what's in front of you. And you're not necessarily watching out what's next to you, which is okay when you're on a highway, right? But not when you're in a seat, you know, not when you're like in places like what we're talking about.
I don't want anybody to think that I'm the one who's got 65. But, you know, when you're driving, I know my behavior, when I see that white line, that I know that someone might be running at a speed trap there, that white line going across,
In Scandinavia, they have this.
it slows me down. So again, like I said, I think we're more focused to the surface of the road. If we're gonna implement signage.
Yeah.
They've really developed their.
I mean, I know there's communities that do that, just even on local roads.
I saw in
You'll pay a lot.
Scandinavia, they have a pattern that they draw on the ground that looks 3D as if you're gonna hit something. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I think, focusing. on-
Flat, speed bump. That is-
Yes, and then there's a gray, so you don't
It's
put
just
your
how it's painted
shadow.
onto the road, right?
So this was the other tip, project recommendations, which is to redesign signalized intersections. And then install right turn lanes and pedestrian bulb outs whenever possible, of course, but just saying, install center medians and left turn lanes and pedestrian refuge spaces. So you guys know what that means, right? It's basically just have a little island in the middle of the road so that people are able to like take a breather before they play Frogger again. So that's basically what it is. Yeah, actually you see it here on the screen there. Create pull-out space parallel with left turn lanes and install new signals and poles with adaptive signalization that include pedestrian and turn sequencing. So those are more of the signalized intersection tip recommendations that can be taken forward.
Yeah, and each intersection might be a bit different, but those
Yeah.
are some of the toolkit items that will often apply.
Yeah.
And by focusing on your signalized intersections first, you're making, by giving them extra safety improvements, you're making sure that people are really able to cross the street safely there. You're,
Yeah.
improving safety for pedestrians where they have the most ability to cross.
Yeah. And kind of like what Susan was saying earlier, which about wayfinding signage and also roadway signage is identify community entry location for each corridor, and you have that happen before you get to the intersection, because once the cars get to intersection, they do it 45 miles per hour, they're not gonna stop if there's a red light, right? And then design, fabricate, and install new wayfinding and street signage per recommendation of this report. So the idea is to create something that is really beautiful, really talks about the places that you are. Each one of the towns along 65 is incredibly individual, and that's actually fantastic, is having, like a pearl, string pearl necklace, it's having all these little pearls that attach, and how each one of them could be very beautiful, but you need to start showing that to people who are driving on the street, on the car. So those are, I think, some of the rest of the tip
Thank you.
recommendations.
I appreciate you doing that. Yeah.
You want to see if there are any other comments on the chat? And I know we are trying to wrap up before the library kicks us out. Let's see if we have other comments.
I had a comment just on a personal note. I've lived in Emsworth and in Sewickley for the past 15 years. And I said to my husband many years ago that I just thought Route 65 was the scariest death trap of a road. And we had to drive on it. There was no other options. And it was such a scary place. And since then, I've gotten involved in public service, and I want to see other people get involved in public service because we need help. And there's a lot to do and people don't want to volunteer. And I know I understand the challenges of it, but when I was leaving to come here tonight, I said to my husband, can you believe that I'm going to this meeting to talk about fixing 65? Like, this is something that I was so upset by for years. And now to be in a position where we could influence it, it's just amazing. So thank you so much for the work that you put into it. It's like, so it makes me so hopeful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and remember, these are toolkits that could be used anywhere. So obviously, they still have to be looked at individually in different places. Like Chad said, there's some things that may not work in this community that work somewhere else. But I think that the idea, that's where the master plan will come in and really look at more detail, what are the real good toolkits that can work in different places.
Yeah, forge ahead, you're first
Yep.
on this. I was on McKnight Road, that's a corridor, Route 8's a corridor. Allegheny River Boulevard is a corridor. I saw a guy play Frogger today on McKnight Road, and some of those designs in the tip right there, they need them there too. So there are advantages to being first, and if your corridor is the one to lead the way on this stuff, you're much more competitive in terms of your funding, so.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for those nice words and congratulations to all of you for having this, and Michael Baker's awesome, so
Well, thank
it's
you.
fun to work with you guys.
You guys are
You're
also.
They're like, you have a question, they're like, we have an expert for that. The person would show up on Zoom and it would be amazing, so it was really fun project.
This whole process though was initiated and led by the COG. So you guys are in an excellent position to have this strong foundation already. You have Quaker Valley COG. Beaver COG was also a part of the process, and hopefully there can be continued collaboration between those two moving forward.
Yep.
But that is an excellent resource you have already to keep building on the momentum for collaboration that you already have within your COG.
And of course, if you guys have any questions, you can reach out through,